slightly bad form for such a well-dressed group, start with some bad news. Bad news about all of you personally. You have been successful to date in your business, in your family life, in your personal investing, all of that. You've been successful because you've been very good at making decisions. Much of your decision-making, however many facts you try and bring in, is actually underpinned by your intuition about how the world works. At no point in human history is for a group like you, is your intuition more likely to be wrong than it is today. So unless you're careful, you're going to be making decisions about your children's education or about your business that will be wrong because you're going to be basing it on your experience over the last 30 years, and the next 30 years are going to be fundamentally different. The reason is we are seeing 4 huge disruptions to the global economy. Each of these 4 are larger than any economic force we've ever seen, and we have all 4 of them colliding at the global economy at the same time. Now, having the wrong intuition about the future is not new. I know there are at least 3 scientists here today. There was a well-known scientist that said heavier than air flying machines were impossible. Does anyone recognize who that was? That was Lord Kelvin. Absolutely right about absolute zero, absolutely wrong about flying machines. Business world gets this wrong. Anyone recognize the quote, "There is a world market for 5 computers," of which I have all 5, so I don't know about the rest of you. Anyone recognize that? That was Thomas Watson, founder of IBM. He had a view about how many computers he could sell. They were sizes of large buildings. The media gets it wrong. Who the hell wants to hear actors talk? That was Harry Warner, Warner Brothers. He had a view that people didn't want to have the film being interrupted by actors talking. Politicians get it wrong. There won't be a woman prime minister in my lifetime. Now, someone has to know that one. That was Margaret Thatcher. She's quite unique on my list, and not only did she have the wrong intuition about the future, she was the one who proved her intuition was wrong. And the world of forecasters get it wrong. 1980, a forecast made about the US cell phone market said there are going to be 900,000 cell phones in the year 2000. A forecast out by a factor of 100. That was McKinsey. Everyone in that list had a set of intuition about the future, and they based it on the past. And now what I'm going to try and do in the next 15 minutes is encourage you to reset your intuition and think about how the world has to be different and how you're going to have to lead differently. Let's talk a little bit about the disruptions. We've heard a bit about globalization earlier on, so I'm not going to talk about that. Let's talk about the rise of emerging markets. The urban population is going up by 65 million people a year, every year. Put that in context, that is about 9 Milans a year, every year. This urbanization is not a new phenomenon. We had the British Industrial Revolution, we urbanized, but we urbanized relatively slowly. It took us about 150 years in the British Industrial Revolution to double GDP per capita. India and China are doubling GDP per capita in about 10 years. So they're doing it about 10 times as fast as we did it in Britain. And the British Industrial Revolution was very important, changing Britain as a society, but also changing Britain's position in the world. The fact that Britain was first in the Industrial Revolution underpinned the British Empire more than anything else. So we're seeing the Industrial Revolution happening now, but 10 times as fast. And when we add up all the other countries going through it, about 300 times the scale. It's the British Industrial Revolution, just times 3,000. Taking lots of people out of poverty is a very positive story. We've taken about 1 billion people out of poverty through doing this. Technology is another big disruption. It's a force that our grandparents lived with, but it's just happening at a different speed. If you take the telephone, one of the first pieces of technology in terms of communication, it took 75 years before there were 50 million people connected to the telephone. 75 years. Radio, which we think is pretty ubiquitous, took 38 years before there were 50 million people connected. Television, 13. The iPod, which we all think of as everyone having at least one iPod, 4 years before there were 50 million users. Facebook, 1 year. Twitter, 9 months. And someone recently did it in 35 days. Any idea who that might have been? Got to 50 million users. It wasn't Snapchat, it was Angry Birds. Angry Birds got to 50 million users. I'm slightly cheating, it's Angry Birds 4, but Angry Birds 4 got to 50 million users in 35 days. The telephone did that in 75 years. Think about that comparison. How many, and none of you are on the telephone time frame, but maybe some of you are on the iPod time frame, 4 years in terms of that. So part of it is we have to get used to technology coming at us faster. We're also seeing aging. We're seeing the working age population in a country like Germany is going to actually shrink by about 15 million people because of the aging of the population. Think about what that's going to do. So what does this all mean? When we put all these forces together, I'm going to talk a little bit about what this means for business, but let's start with where the consumers are. It is very easy for your business to be obsessed by the millennials. You know, the millennials are different. I had to go and talk to lots of people. They say about the millennials, how they're different, all of that. In Europe, the millennials are actually a pretty slow, unexciting group of customers to target. There are very few of them because of the falling birth rates. And in many parts of Europe, a bunch of them have been unemployed and will never earn the same amount as their previous generation. If you take the graying consumer in Europe, the growth in their consumption is 5 times the growth in the consumption of the millennials. And then if we look at the emerging market consumers, let's say in a country like China, it is 20 times the growth in consumption we're seeing from the European millennials. Now, one of the problems is that many of you are used to targeting young people. It is not cool, a bit like June said earlier, to have elderly customers in your adverts. You know, so you have to work out what's it going to take. What are the products that the elderly customers want? Take a television remote control, not your industry. A television remote control, if you get the best one from Samsung or LG, it has 50 buttons on it. Now, is that a practical remote control to sell to a 70-year-old? Think about shoes. My grandmother used to wear children's shoes. And I asked her, why are you wearing these children's shoes? And she said, because they got Velcro. It's much easier to put on and take off. How many of your shoes are designed for elderly hands that can put them on and off? Slightly arthritic hands. Or are they still designed with laces and all of that? Part of it is to think about these new consumers and how you sell to them. Part of it also is to think about how you build trust. Let's talk about the millennials. The millennials are the least trusting group in general. They don't trust politicians, they don't trust the media, they don't trust business leaders. Millennials, even if they go and see their doctor, will go and read a peer-reviewed paper before they follow the advice the doctor gives them. So we have a group of people who don't trust anyone, apart from the fact that they're prepared to leave the key for their house under the doormat and have a total stranger they have never met stay in their house for the weekend. Think about it. These are people who don't trust their doctor but will rely on a total stranger not trashing their house because that total stranger has a great Airbnb rating. Now, how can we take that? How can we make that better? How can we use that wave to be more thoughtful in terms of how we build trust with our customers? One of my colleagues has a great idea that when you get on an airplane, you have your boarding pass. The electronic boarding pass then changes, and all the flight attendants are there, and you can sit there and rate them how well they do. It changes a one-off game interaction to a multi-period interaction because you're rating each other. They have the same. Difficult customers get a poor rating next time they're seated by the toilets. Good customers get upgraded. How can we use the Airbnb rating, which is, I think, a really powerful idea, that we can build trust to move that into a new world? So that's the world of consumptions. Different growth groups, different needs. We need to reposition what we're going after and to think about how we build trust with these groups of consumers. Let's talk about the nature of competition. The last 30 years has been a wonderful period for business. Profits have almost grown twice the rate of GDP for business. They've benefited from global supply chains, technology, falling taxes, falling interest rates. It's been a great period. The next 30 years is going to be much tougher. Lower growth is going to be part of it, interest rates are not going to get cheaper, and some governments are going to want to start increasing taxes. But most importantly, we're going to see a change in competition. We're going to see three sources of new competition. We're going to see the rise of emerging market companies. Half of the world's largest companies by 2025 are going to come from emerging markets. And when we look at these numbers, these companies typically have half the profit level of their Western peers because they worry much more about taking share than profitability. You're a very profitable industry in most cases. They will come in and they will target you, and they'll say, we're going to be able to go after them. We can do it at 30% less, and we can go and we can come and target your industry and grow. That's a big threat, the rise of emerging market companies. The second threat is the rise of tech companies stepping out. Those of you in the media industry have already seen this. Our rule of thumb is when a tech company steps into another industry, they typically destroy about 5 times the profit they create. With Airbnb, it's about 8 times. So as tech companies start stepping into your area, and you may not have seen it yet, but it's going to increasingly, those of you who are not in the media side of the fashion business, tech companies are going to be a threat. And the third biggest threat is the rise of small and medium-sized enterprises. Small and medium-sized enterprises who could not compete with you 20 years ago, but who can now. And I give you the example. I was planting my garden the other day, and I bought some seeds. I bought them on Amazon. They arrived in a handwritten envelope from an SME, a small enterprise in China. This Chinese enterprise sits on Amazon, sells around the world, sells seeds at a different price point. They now have the scale advantage because the scale advantage comes from being on Amazon. They wouldn't have been able to compete 20 years ago. They couldn't have had a sales force visiting all the stores, but by being on Amazon, they can send around the world. It's interesting. The Chinese have thrown out Google and Facebook, etc., from China. Amazon are allowed to carry on operating there because they think they're going to help globalize their businesses. So those are the 3 big shocks to business. It's going to be the rise of emerging market companies, it's going to be the rise of tech companies stepping out, and then SMEs. And we're going to see similar disruption in the world of work. 2.5 million people drive for a living in North America. 2.5 million people. 3/4 of those jobs could be replaced in the next 20 years by self-driving cars. These are relatively unskilled people. Think about the Trump effect. This is going to be the Trump effect. It's going to be bigger. Prior to 2005, 98% of people in the developed world were richer than their parents. That number, only 30% of people now are better off than the same person 10 years ago. Now, a lot of that's the financial crisis, but when you work it through and you look at the things like self-driving cars, like AI, there is going to be a growing group of people in the world who are going to be poorer than their parents and richer than their children. And that's the group that are unhappy. People don't mind inequality. If I'm getting better off and someone else is getting much better off, I don't mind. It's when I stop advancing that people get upset. So you as an industry need to be ready for new consumers. You need to be ready for new sources of competition. And you need to play your part in a world where this inequality is going to result in social tensions. But finally, you've all got a role as leaders. And we think the leaders in this world are going to have to be somewhat different. In the last 30 years, there was a big benefit for leaders focusing on their own business and their current customers. You need to spend more time looking outside your industry. How did Google disrupt the media industry? What can we learn from Airbnb? Do you spend time in Silicon Valley talking to people in Silicon Valley and saying, what's this going to mean for your industry? And trying to understand that. And I think that's going to be a big premium on business leaders going forward, looking out to understand. The second attribute of leaders is going to be being quick and low cost. If you're agile and you get the world wrong, you can respond. Both Netflix and Blockbuster had business models that weren't going to survive. Netflix used to send the videos out by post. Blockbuster had physical stores. One was agile and responded, the other didn't. So the agile and the low-cost companies are going to be the ones that are able to respond. And it's also about individuals. The agile individuals are going to be able to respond to a changing world. And being agile is much easier to do if you're low cost. If you're a high-cost player, it is hard to run multiple things. If you're low cost, you have the opportunity to do that. And one of my favorite examples of someone who is agile and low cost is the Indian government. Now, if any of you have dealt with an Indian bureaucrat, it doesn't feel like a very agile place. But they had a space program, and they put an orbiter around Mars. They were the fourth space program to do it. But what is more amazing is the price they did it at. The Indians put their orbit around Mars for $75 million. To put that in context, the film The Martian cost $110 million to make. And the last time the Americans bought an orbiter it cost $700 million. Think about it. Less than The Martian, a tenth the cost of the last time the Americans bought an orbiter to go around Mars. I was talking to a space group of people, from the space industry, and they came up afterwards and said it didn't count. And I said, well, why didn't it count? Did it not go around Mars? Oh, no, it went around Mars okay, but they didn't do the tracking. They had to have NASA do the tracking. We had to sell them the guidance system. Well, that's a bit like saying Uber doesn't count. Because, Uber hasn't made the telephone. They haven't put the cell towers up. Those maps that Uber have, they bought in from Google. Think about it. Agile companies don't try and do everything themselves, they bring it in. So leaders are going to be outward-looking, they're going to be agile, and finally, in a world that is changing, it is very easy to say, I'm going to try and defend where I was. I'm going to stop these waves of things attacking my core. I'm going to try and build a wall, maybe, to protect my core. In practice, the tidal wave that's coming, if your core's not going to survive, you better recognize it now and look to create new things. The winners are going to be the one who realize the core might disappear, like Netflix's mailed DVDs. That business will no longer exist, but they could create something new. And that's going to be people who give up, realize that the core can't be defended and do something else. And that's going to be disproportionately the optimists. Because the optimists will say, yes, my core may disappear, but I have the capabilities, I have the brand, I have the people, I have the financial backing to be able to create something new. So, all of you, the question is, do you have the leadership skills to require a world that your intuition is wrong? Do you have the ability to look outside, the type of things you're doing today? Do you have the ability to be agile and try new things? And then finally, are you optimistic enough that you've got the intrinsic capabilities you can create something new? Thank you.